We've come together today to talk about sustainable finance. It's widely recognized that we cannot achieve the UN Sustainable Development Goals or the Paris Agreement without effective engagement of the financial system. At present, too much money is still flowing into carbon-intensive activity, and that needs to stop. The UK's COP president, Alok Sharma, has presented 5 priorities for the climate summit: clean growth, nature, zero emissions transport, adaptation and resilience, and crucially, finance. In fact, it has been rightly noted that sustainable finance is the COP26 deliverable that will make all of the others possible. To that end, the COP26 private finance agenda, with which I'm sure most of you are familiar, launched by the Bank of England, is intended to mobilize private finance in support of the global transition to net zero. The more specific objective in that agenda is that every professional financial decision will need to take climate change into account as we go forward. We are launching this action platform to bring this objective into reality, and we look forward to working with others that share that objective. We will use the action platform to develop game-changing solutions and partnerships by leveraging the momentum of COP26 to drive real progress on sustainable finance. Starting today, we have a very full agenda, and we want to get into it right away. So I'm just going to give you a very brief overview of what you can expect. First, we will hear from Sveinung Rotevatn, the Minister of Climate and Environment from the Norwegian government. Then we have a UK government representative, the Right Honourable Anna-Marie Trevelyan, MP, Minister of State for Business, Energy and Clean Growth. These presentations will be followed by 3 panel sessions moderated by Robin Wigglesworth, Global Finance Correspondent at the Financial Times. I'm not going to read out the names of all of our illustrious speakers, but I hope that you can see them on screen. And in any event, Robin will introduce them and you'll get to see them in due course. The first panel will discuss the current state of sustainable finance more widely. The second will look at the future of sustainable finance in the UK and Norway. And then we will have a conversation about bilateral cooperation between the UK and Norway in this area. We will wrap up the proceedings with Kim Gabrielli, Executive Director of the UN Global Compact Network Norway, and Hannah Thornham, the Head of Climate Change and Sustainability Services for EY Norway. They will provide you with some more detailed information about the Sustainable Finance Action Platform and how you can get involved. And now, without any further delay, I am delighted to introduce Sveinung Rotevatn, the Minister of Climate and Environment from the Norwegian government.
Good afternoon, everyone. The pandemic is a threat to health, welfare, and the economy across the globe. The situation is grave and unpredictable. However, without underestimating it, I would say that the pandemic also offers some opportunities for the future. First, the global response has shown that we can change the way we live drastically in a short time. Change is necessary in order to reach our climate goals. Second, the emissions have dropped dramatically due to the downturn of the economy. We must use this opportunity to rebuild a more sustainable economy and a more sustainable financial system. We will have to mobilize both private and public sector to make the financial streams consistent with a greener future. We already see racing technology development towards low emissions solutions in nearly every part of the economy. Some of the biggest economies in the world now put forward ambitious targets that can accelerate the transition. Earlier this year, my government put forward a climate action plan for transforming the Norwegian society as a whole by 2030. It shows how Norway will achieve its climate target and at the same time create green growth. The plan sends a clear message to investors and to companies, and it is a message of stronger taxation of emissions. It is a message of climate-related requirements in public procurement, and it is a message of financial support for the development of new green technologies. Mobilizing climate finance is less a question of generating new investment than shifting existing finance flows. We simply need more Paris-consistent finance. More and more investors put sustainability at the heart of decision-making. By doing that, they reduce their exposure to fossil solutions. Concerns about climate risk have moved upstream in the financial system. Climate risk now has the attention of boards and CEOs. The finance sector is key to reach the Paris goals. The UK and Norway Sustainable Finance Action Platform can play an important role to accelerate the sustainable finance agenda. It can also enhance the important work that the EU is doing on sustainable finance. Reducing climate risk is not only for the private sector. Also, the public sector needs to be aware of the consequences and opportunities from low emission development. That's why Norway in 2017 appointed an expert committee to assess the climate risk for the Norwegian economy. An important message from the committee was that evaluation of climate risk and associated management is key in both private and public sector. We appreciate that the UK is placing greening of the financial system as a top priority in the lead up to COP26. Norway will support you in these efforts. Together, we can accelerate the green shift needed. Thank you and good luck with the event.
Thanks very much, Sveinung. And now we'll go straight on to the Right Honourable Anna-Marie Trevelyan, MP, Minister of State for Business, Energy and Clean Growth from the UK Government. Anna-Marie.
I'd like to thank the UN Global Compact and the British Embassy in Oslo for hosting this event and for creating this ambitious new collaboration between the UK and Norway on sustainable finance. These are unprecedented times. We are faced with multiple crises from climate change to COVID-19, and international collaboration is more important than ever to ensure that the global economic recovery lays a foundation for the long-term transition to net zero in line with our Paris Agreement goals. This transition will require unprecedented changes to global financial flows, how we invest, how we measure risk, and how we assign value to assets. We must all do our part. And the UK is working with the financial services sector, international financial institutions, central banks, regulators, and finance ministries to unlock rapid action at scale. I welcome Norway's recently published climate plan, which recognises the important role the financial industry must play as a driving force in the transition to a net zero economy. Ahead of COP26, we are requesting all donor countries significantly increase their climate finance commitments. The UK's ambition in doubling its international climate finance to £11.6 billion over the next 5 years and collectively honouring the $100 billion goal. The UK and Norway have already made great strides together, and alongside Germany, we have exceeded the commitment to spend $5 billion of climate finance on combating deforestation globally between 2015 and 2020. Multilateral development banks and development finance institutions also have extraordinary spending power and must rapidly align their activities with the Paris Agreement. Public and development finance play a crucial role in bearing risk and in catalysing action, but they cannot fund the transition alone. A fundamental shift in the global financial system is required. So as we move towards the UK's COP26 and G7 presidencies, we will be using our position to accelerate international momentum towards the alignment of all financial flows with low emission and climate resilient growth. Mark Carney has set out a framework to ensure every financial decision takes climate change into account and builds a private financial system fit for net zero. This includes the reporting of climate-related financial risks and opportunities. And the UK will become the first G20 country to make TCFD-aligned disclosures fully mandatory across the economy, with most requirements introduced in the next 3 years. Secondly, we need to manage the physical and transition risks arising from climate change. Here, the Bank of England is working with the Network for Greening the Financial System to mainstream actions such as issuing supervisory expectations on climate risks and stress testing banks and insurers against climate scenarios. Thirdly, we must support investors to realise the enormous commercial opportunities in the transition to net zero and report on how their portfolios are aligned for the transition. The COP26 presidency and Mark Carney are urging financial institutions to join the race to zero. Major asset owners representing $5 trillion and major asset managers covering over $9 trillion have now committed to net zero by 2050. For these huge quantities of finance to flow, we must optimise public policy and finance so that it effectively leverages private investment, connecting capital with investable projects. The Prime Minister's 10-point plan for a green industrial revolution clearly signals our direction and ambition for the market. It contains £12 billion of new government investment, mobilising up to 3 times as much private investment by 2030. And next year, the UK will issue its first sovereign green bond, subject to market conditions. And we will create a new infrastructure bank, which will co-invest alongside private sector investors for infrastructure projects that deliver for the UK, including our net zero commitment. Ahead of COP26, the UK is working with the Climate Finance Leadership Initiative and its partners to create investment-friendly business environments and robust pipelines of bankable, sustainable infrastructure opportunities in key developing countries. Furthermore, in February, the UK's Mobilist programme will launch a request for proposals from fund managers to identify a listed infrastructure vehicle that can unlock finance for climate and development. This week, I also announced the launch of the UK's COP26 Blended Finance Platform. This will bring together providers of both concessional and commercial capital with fund managers and sponsors to catalyse blended finance investments into developing countries at scale. Norway is also leading international efforts, for example, as the largest donor in the Transformative Carbon Asset Facility and a co-donor alongside the UK in the World Bank's Carbon Capture and Storage Trust Fund. The Sustainable Finance Action Platform will allow the UK and Norway to share our experience and drive our collective leadership to new highs as we seek to chart a green recovery and tackle climate change. I'd like to thank you all for joining us today, and I look forward to working with you as we redouble our efforts on this crucial agenda moving forwards. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anne-Marie. It's really encouraging to see such strong high-level commitments from both of our governments. It's cause for considerable optimism, I think. And now I am delighted to hand over to Robin Wigglesworth from the Financial Times to take us through the panel sessions and the rest of the afternoon. Thank you all very much, and thank you, Robin.
Thank you very much for that introduction. Hello, everybody. We have a fantastic panel, several panels coming up. The first one on the current state of sustainable finance is with Karina Smith-Iheanacho, the Chief Governance and Compliance Officer at Norges Bank Investment Management, Carolina Minio-Paluello, Global Head of Products, Solutions and Quant at Schroders, and Geir Bergskaug, Chief Executive of Sparebank Sør. So, thank you guys for being here. We have a lot of stuff to get through, so I want to dive straight in. I mean, maybe Guide, maybe you can kick us off and talk a little bit about why you think finance has a role to play, perhaps even an important role to play in the transition to a green economy.
Well, thank you, Robin. The financial industry has definitely a key role to play in tackling climate change and supporting a sustainable development. And we have a lot of roles to fill as a lender, insurer, investor, advisor. The financial sector can be a very good partner and a driver for change in other industries. One of the financial sector's roles is to decide who receives finance and at what cost. And through expectations managing, requirements pricing, and constructive collaboration, the financial sector can definitely drive change both at individual companies and across the business sector. In the case of banks, we have two main ways to be a catalyst for transition in most sectors of the economy. Of course, first of all, banks decide who receives debt capital at what cost. And this is, of course, the most obvious way banks can contribute to the transition we definitely have to go through. And if the bank sees a project with elevated risk, the bank will need a higher interest rate to match this risk. And if the bank considers the risk to be too low or low, all things equal, the interest rates will be lower. So that's quite a strong change for our changing power. The second way banks can contribute is maybe not as obvious, but not less important. The business society in Norway is dominated by small and medium-sized enterprises. And when doing investment decisions, these businesses must analyze the future opportunities and risks. And they have to factor in the megatrends of climate risk and sustainability. And that is a key for good investment decisions. And definitely, the bank's role as an advisor is of major importance in this case. And to sum up, in this way we can contribute to reducing climate and environmental risks while creating new and sustainable business opportunities. And I believe this creates value for financial sector as a whole, for our clients and other stakeholders, and definitely as for the society as a whole. And in the Norwegian financial industry, we do take this role very seriously, and our competitors and ourselves are now putting a lot of effort into aligning our business strategies with broader societal goals, as expressed in the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Climate Agreement.
How much do these considerations weigh in on, for example, whether to make a loan? And would you refuse to do business with Equinor, for example, because it's a giant oil company?
Well, that is one of the tough questions. Definitely, all banks are in the process of rolling out stronger requirements for loans and credits. And to go a little bit back, I mean, the Norwegian financial industry has been a front runner when it comes to sustainable finance. And as an example, I can mention that the financial industry of Norway released a roadmap for green competitiveness in the Norwegian financial sector back in 2018. And the roadmap was actually the first in its kind in the world, and actually was uniting the whole Norwegian financial sector under a joint vision of profitable and sustainable Norwegian financial sector in
Clearly,
2030.
I mean, but by roadmaps, I mean, that's great, but I mean, what kind of concrete impact would, for example, Norway's biggest company is an oil company. Norway's biggest source of revenue is oil. Would you, as CEO of a bank, restrict lending to that oil company, for example? Do you think people will start doing that?
I mean, for most banks, part of this is actually delivering new requirements to the companies to actually show action plans on improving and improving climate situation and reducing emissions. And in my example, in our bank, we have fairly strict rules for lending out to typical oil production companies, etc. So yes, we're implementing and have very clear limits to what we actually lend, which industries we do lend out to, and what the requirements we do have for these companies.
Yeah. No, I mean, obviously, I mean, the moral suasion aspect is really interesting. I mean, maybe switching to Karina, I'd love to hear your perspective, from MBIM's perspective, as an enormous owner of equities around the world. I mean, you don't just finance these companies, you actually own big chunks of these companies. And how do you ensure that sort of the buzziness and all the talk around stewardship actually leads to meaningful change and just doesn't become another arduous set of box ticking, essentially, by corporate compliance officers?
Yeah, hi Robin. Yes, that's right. We are a large owner. We have ownership in more than 9,000 companies in more than 70 markets. And we actually have an average ownership of 1.5% of all the world's listed companies and 2.4 on average in Europe. And I must say this is a truly exciting time to work with companies to promote sustainable business models. And as a long-term investor, we believe this is crucial for our long-term returns. But as you said, we're a large owner. We need to prioritize and systemize our stewardship work. We work with ESG and stewardship at 3 different levels, at the company level, the portfolio level, and the market level. So let me give an example. Let me take climate change at the heart of sustainable finance. So at the company level, we consider whether the board is appropriately overseeing climate change risk, and we engage with the board. As the Norwegian minister said, the boards and the CEOs wants to talk about climate change risk. And we also vote. Every year we vote on 115,000 resolutions, and we see an increase in shareholders' resolution regarding sustainability. So that's sort of the company level. At the portfolio level, we review our overall exposure and consider whether some companies are lagging so far behind that we should divest. And then let's go to the market level. And there we promote sustainability reporting to help capital flow to its most productive and resilient use. And you mentioned sort of whether this is just a box-ticking exercise, and it is definitely not. We see that ownership yields results, and we also see that it's important, especially in unstable times. So even in the COVID year of 2020, we saw great progress for many companies, which we were in dialogue with. And we also saw an increasing number of shareholders' resolution on sustainability. We saw those gain a majority. So for us, it is encouraging to see that companies and investors have decided to maintain focus on sustainability to such large extent throughout this time. So I think it shows that stewardship actually works.
But I mean, just given the sheer number of companies that MBIM owns, I mean, these are tens of thousands of companies. I mean, I can't remember how many of people at the top of my head work at MBIM, but can you actually make a granular decision and sort of engagement? I mean, 2,000, almost 3,000 meetings worth 1,200 companies in 2020. I mean, obviously it was a pandemic year, but I mean, how can you go from this being more than sort of nudging people in the right direction and maybe affecting more actual concrete change quicker? Is that even possible?
Yeah,
is that even desirable for a big shareholder like MBIM?
Yeah, I mean, those are very good questions. As you said, last year, just to show the sheer extent of our meetings, we had 3,000 company meetings, and more than 1,000 of them were on sustainability. But as I said, we have to prioritize. And we have many ways of doing it. But one thing we do systematically is to work with data. So we monitor our whole portfolio. And on that basis, we see which are the companies we really want to engage with. And that's based on a number of issues. It is based upon what the companies actually do, but also how much we have invested in companies, as we want to prioritize the companies where we have the most money put in from our fund. So there's various ways we prioritize our engagement. But when we do engage with a company, we do it quite in some depth. And I'd also like to mention that we have the department working with stewardship that I'm heading, but we also have all the portfolio managers that knows the companies in detail. So we have close cooperation with them. So that makes us able to cover even more companies.
Okay, that's good.
And just I want to also mention voting, then there we hit all the companies in our portfolio, and we have been able to scale that up. So for every company we own, we have a principal decision on how we vote, in particular also on sustainability issues.
Yeah. Well, Carolina, turn to the quant in the house. You know, I love quant. It's one of my favorite subjects to cover at the FT. I'd love to hear your perspective. You know, asset manager and asset managers are under huge pressure from institutional investors like MBIM and others to sort of take ESG more seriously. I'd love to hear, one thing that Karina mentioned, that they're actually seeing that there is a return component here as well, that ESG helps financial returns. I'd love to hear your thoughts whether this is essentially just a bit of data mining, that it's helped by the fact that obviously oil has done badly over the past decade and oil stocks and energy stocks have as well, or whether you think there is something durable here that people can harness over the next decade as well.
Thank you, Robin. And of course, this is the critical question. And you're absolutely right. As a quant, with my quant hat, this is the first thing that I would look at. And as Karine said, is a question of data. Now, the first thing, just to remind everyone that probably until the end of 2015, until we had the COP21, the UN SDGs, actually the ESG dynamics were absolutely not priced into the market. So anyone who's trying to find any relationship would have struggled, right? So we, of course, talking about short period of time. And what we are realizing is that, of course, you can start seeing some risk mitigation effect, but of course, if you understand the data, as Karine is saying, you can make more informed decisions. But we have to be very, very careful in drawing too many conclusions, whether because now everyone is buying the same stocks, whether because people will talk about some sectors doing better and applying it to sustainability. So it's definitely a cautious stand that we need to take. Having said that, Robin, I think the market has moved from thinking that we exclude some stocks and hence impacting performance to something much more greater, where we are talking about integration of risk, looking at ESG, looking at impact as a risk, looking at the impact that companies have on society and how this social cost will become more of a financial cost by regulations. So I would say it's something that within our fiduciary duty, we need to understand. We need to understand the transitions, the risk of transitioning versus not. And to the point also on the active ownership, that is where the dialogue, the engagement, the voting, and eventually the divesting allow us to make pressure on companies, but actually through this dialogue, getting better information whether a company is going to make it. So I think it's a very important point that you're raising.
Yeah, well, just on the flows, clearly there's been a huge rising interest and there have been incredibly encouraging inflows into ESG strategies, impact investing across the board. I was just looking at the numbers from 2020, it was pretty astonishing. And this is, of course, encouraging, but do you think there's a risk that essentially this becomes like a momentum trade, essentially that, money goes into ESG weighted funds or, whether they're passive or active, and then that money goes into the same companies, they do better, and then ESG starts looking better and better and better. And at some point, it topples by itself. And actually that doesn't just harm the performance of a few funds, but it harms the view of ESG and sustainability more broadly, that we're kind of mis-selling this as a way to enhance returns rather than as a way that this is just something we need to do to preserve our planet.
I think this is a very fair point, and I would say on the shorter term, there is definitely a risk that the first move is actually going to be excluding the bad companies, and that is what, of course, the passive flows or the passive ESG will force that. And I would say it is a good pressure to actually shake the system, that something has to change. But I would say with the pressure that are coming in, the raise of awareness and the understanding of what is happening, regulation coming in, also the SFDR, and more specification on the Article 8 and 9, I would say there is an increased pressure of proving, Robin, what actually, how this is integrated into the process, and that doesn't apply only to one fund managed much broader. So I would say that this is going to become increasingly completely part of the investment process. And we think that maybe in 5 years' time, we won't even have that conversation because it will be completely integral. But the asset managers like ourselves have much bigger pressure in demonstrating what we're doing. And I can assure you it's going to be much more than just excluding the obvious sectors or the obvious companies. So the bar is being increased. And hence, unless this is fully integrated in the process, I would say it will really put the credibility at stake.
Okay. Well, one of the aspects that you all have mentioned, we only have a few more minutes left. I'd love to hear your quick, short answers to, the issue of data. Do we have good enough, standardized enough data on these issues to do the best we can, or is that, how much do you want to see that guide? Maybe what's your thought on sustainability and ESG data? Is it good enough?
You were asking me.
Yeah. On the hotspot.
Yeah. Well, the data are definitely not good enough, and all the work that is being done in creating transparent and consistent definitions is extremely important. And this is a gradual improvement, but we won't be able to really get going before we have a much better taxonomy. And what is happening in the EU now with the new taxonomy is actually quite important step to be able to get further. And I believe that it's a long way to go. It's a lot of work to actually cover during the next couple of years, but it might be quite a quantum leap towards more sustainable finance when that gets in place.
Yeah.
So I believe that is very important, and that we have actually the possibility to report on activities. And it is extremely important that the companies we lend to are able to have a qualified reporting on sustainability as well.
Yeah.
So those are actually necessary actions to take.
Yeah, essential building blocks. Karina, what your perspective quickly? We only have a couple of minutes left now. Data. How can we make it better?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with Guy. Yeah, I totally agree with Guy. I mean, the numbers are not good enough at all. The reporting is not good enough.
Yeah.
Just to say, we have measured companies reporting on climate change for more than 10 years. And there's two things we are seeing. The point one, companies are getting better, so that's encouraging. But point two, it's still a very long way to go when it comes to sustainability reporting. But it's encouraging to see the regulatory initiatives in this area, and hopefully companies will step up.
Yeah. Carolina, data, yay or nay? I mean, you're a quant. You must always think more data is better than no data, right?
I would completely agree with you, and I would say due to Karin's point, data is improving. So we rely very much on any data that we find or publicly available information. But of course, we think that as a standard is being created, we cannot wait. And so, of course, we spend also a lot of time understanding the data, creating our own data to supplement what is publicly available. And for us as active manager, the way we are also trying to improve it is by using it, right? Because one thing is emerging is as we are going to use it, integrate our investment process, we also have, I would say, the judgment, the overlay of our portfolio managers to help improve it until one day there'll be a standard measure, but this is probably not tomorrow. And in the meantime, we can't wait. And so you're absolutely right. We spend a lot of time working, collecting and improving the data to make the assessment. And I would say also moving from understanding how companies behave, which is more the ESG, to understanding the impact dimension. And that's where also the data is even more scarce. And that's where we're spending more time understanding and creating more impact measures.
Yeah. Well, guys, thanks so much for your time, Karina, Carolina and Guy. I really appreciate it. It's been really interesting. We have to move on to our next panel. Sadly, we're kind of running through things pretty quickly. I probably talk about this for a few hours. So the next panel, if I just get up my notes because I want to get this right, is the future of sustainable finance in the UK and Norway. So with us we have Jan Erik Saugestad, the CEO of Storebrand Asset Management, Siri Kalvig, the CEO of the sovereign climate investment company Nysnø, and Omar Salim, the CEO of Arabesque. Well, guys, thank you so much for being here today. Siri, I've lived most of my life in Norway and the UK, and I know that sadly both countries can get pretty windy, especially offshore. I'd love to hear your thoughts on, maybe this being a sort of a common natural resource that both countries could probably harvest even more so. I mean, what can we do to, really sort of get offshore wind off the ground, as it were, here in the Northern Sea a bit more?
UK and Norway could collaborate. And I don't think we sufficiently harvesting this great potential up to now. And it is, as I said, a great area where we can collaborate. And we have a history together collaborating with exploring the North Sea. And we could learn from the oil and gas sector, and they have, to a large extent, managed to collaborate, the two countries. And I think there is a huge upside in doing the same thing in the field of offshore wind. And to some extent, we already do this, and I think we will see even more promising collaboration when it comes to floating wind, which will be the next step for both countries.
Why is that?
Well, I think especially also in some part of the UK, you also need to explore floating wind, and this has been quite hard. It's not very cost efficient yet, but Equinor has a leading role here now. And in Scotland, we saw the world first floating wind farm. Now we will see the Tampen project being released, and I think here there will be also a great potential for this offshore service sector, which both countries rely on. So both offshore wind and hydrogen and carbon capture and storage would be very interesting areas to explore together. And also now when we have the same, or I'm not sure what kind of, how the relationship for UK and EU will be, but at least
does anybody know?
No, but we will have a common ground also, I think, to address EU. And EU is for both of our countries very important markets.
Yeah. What do you think the main bottlenecks are developing more offshore wind?
Well, it is very expensive still, the floating wind, and I think the bottom fixed offshore wind, there Norway doesn't have any, what you say, natural. We have deep waters, so it's difficult to be a front runner in bottom fixed offshore wind. But when it comes to floating wind, I think both countries can step on the shoulders from the oil and gas industry and move this area to a next level. But it's still quite expensive. So here we need to find out how to mobilize more private capital into this area and how to make it cost efficient. And Nysnø is a private governmental cooperation because every time Nysnø invest, we need to do this together with a private player. So Nysnø is a new financial tool from the government to facilitate growth in hard to abate climate technology, which I also think floating offshore wind will be. So, and I'm really eager to know if there is similar instruments in the UK. UK have a lot to learn us in green finance, but I think also Nysnø itself could be an interesting tool for UK to look closer to, and maybe we can inspire a similar setup in UK, maybe.
Okay, we might return to that point. I do want to talk to Jan Erik, just because one thing that Guy had mentioned, and some of the others have obliquely hinted to, is the upcoming EU legislation on sustainable finance. I'd love to hear your view, as a head of a big asset management company. What you think the impact will be, what you'd really like to see maybe from it as well.
Well, thank you. Storebrand has been in sustainable investing for more than 25 years. And I would say increasingly we see stronger and stronger cooperation between investors. We see cooperation between investors and companies, and now also a cooperation between investors, companies and governments. And to respond to your question on the regulatory framework and legislation, I think firstly, it's important that we get that legislation to form a level playing field so that sustainable businesses can really use their competitive advantage and be competitive. Secondly, we definitely need to work harder on putting a price on externalities, emissions, consumption of natural resources, so that the market forces can really work. And thirdly, of course, governments are a significant capital owner and also consume financial services. And in that respect, I must say, you know, I'm impressed by the UK local authorities that they really have now declared a climate emergency, and we work closely with several of them in order to provide solutions.
How so?
You could
Can you
add
tell
to
us a
this
little bit
list.
about? What kind of solutions do you give? What kind of solutions do you help? I presume finance for local authorities in the UK. That sounds quite interesting.
Well, it's definitely providing them with low carbon solutions in their pension to manage their pension capital, which is clearly a significant contribution that the governments can make in terms of managing their capital.
Yeah. And I always kind of ask this almost flippantly, but like, if you were God for a day, what would you like to see put in or done on the EU legislation that's coming? In an ideal world, if you controlled everything, you wrote the whole legislative tract, what would you do? What would you like to see?
Well, I think that was quite a question, but no, I would. I really believe that if we are able to put the correct price on externalities and get a framework that could really help the markets work well, we can really enable the whole economic system in a more sustainable fashion than we're able to today. So I think that would be, you know, my key objective.
Basically, sort of more aggressively jack up the price of emissions and let the economy sort of work itself out, as it were.
Not necessarily only emissions, but also consumption of natural resources that are exploited in an unsustainable way today.
Okay, yeah. Well, I mean, just Omar, turning to you, I mean, you're a quant, and we talked a little bit about data earlier. I mean, my favorite quote is always, I can't remember the name of him, there was an American engineer who once said, "In God we trust, the rest must bring data." And, you know, obviously data is a huge important thing here, but it does seem to be a bit of a dog's dinner in the sustainability, ESG, emissions side. That must be a huge challenge to the investment group, especially one that is, you know, more quantitative, like Arabesque. How do you deal with that?
That is indeed right, and thank you so much for having me. So that is not just a challenge for quant funds. I think this is a challenge for all asset managers, in fact, for the entire finance industry, as we've heard in this participation and in the panel before. So from my perspective, what I can explain is from my personal journey and Arabesque is basically we set off to start an asset manager focused entirely on sustainability 7 years ago. And when we looked at the data, we found them very subjective and backward-looking, rather expensive. They're model-based, particularly when it comes to climate. You know, 60-70% of the conventional data that we all use and buy are not actually from the companies themselves, but basically assumptions on the CO2 emissions or other emissions from those companies. So it's quite staggering to see that although this is probably one of the biggest challenges we have as humanity, the very underlying data that we base our decisions on are utterly subjective. And there is a great study from MIT called Aggregated Confusion. So I would strongly recommend everybody to have a look at that. So that's basically the status quo. And it doesn't help us to do data bashing. It's easy to say, oh, data's rubbish. That's why, you know, we have to wait, or, you know, see what taxonomy will bring or others. But I would encourage us to just take a step back. And certainly my generation, we learned to use financial information to take financial decisions. And the exciting thing that's happening is that basically the next generation is using financial and non-financial information to take financial decisions. And that's a huge learning curve. That's not just a new approach to data and information, it's also the need to create a new instrument. And that to me is AI. So when we set off to basically look at the data that we could find, basically that didn't help us, we went there to capture our own data. And these are unstructured data, and you cannot just load them into your systems. You need to find a way to make sense out of this data. And you'll find that machine learning and the data have a symbiotic relationship. So basically, you need machine learning to make sense out of these data, and you need the data to train the models. So basically, these two come only together. So the whole discussion will not just going to be around environmental challenges. It becomes a discussion of data, and then it becomes a discussion of machine learning. So I think the next level of discussion is going to be, how do we make sense out of AI to solve our climate challenges? And then to take this one step further and just zoom out, if we look at the finance industry, to me, they will be heavily disrupted in the next years to come. And like the car industry, you have two disruptors. The car industry was shaken up by electric engines and self-driving technology. And if you as a car manufacturer don't want to adapt, you're obviously going to, face challenges. And in the finance industry, we are basically having these disruptors, non-financial data or ESG and machine learning. So I believe in 4, 5, 6 years to come, sustainability and AI will disrupt everything that we touch and do in the finance industry. And that's basically the framework that we should take in order to capture and take advantage of that. And if you ask what is the ultimate result, where do we want to get to? It should be about authenticity. It should be about not patronizing that basically as an asset manager, I want you to do whatever I think is right or wrong. But data should empower us to express our values. Just as long as legal, that's fine. Just, it's a journey. It's something that we all need to work together to. It should be based on a common framework. It should be definitely affordable, because as asset manager, all we want to do is we want to do what's right. Why should you have to pay such a fortune for the data in the first place? And you want to get to a place where you can really encourage change, which I hope this is what we're going to see over the next years to come.
What I don't get, and I cover a lot of, sort of machine learning and natural language processing through my job. Isn't that just essentially sort of almost applying a Rube Goldberg sort of level of complexity to something that actually has a fairly simple solution? We just need to cut emission, cut consumption, and make the planet greener, and we can use all the machine learning algorithms we want. But what is that really going to help? Really, how is that concretely going to impact things?
That's exactly right. So basically, it's an expression of values through our financial instruments, be it insurance policies, loans, or investments, or whatever we do. But the point is that it's like, you're on a journey. If your map is wrong, if your compass is not properly calibrated, you might just do the opposite. You're just going in the wrong direction. So when it comes to data, and basically that's the key question I think you're asking me is, if you don't have proper data, if you don't understand the data, we just risk to take bad decisions, particularly if we just want to, punish companies which might be involved in, let's say, oil and gas. But at the end of the day, are our best chances for transition to a cleaner, more sustainable future. So understanding the data, being honest and truthful about the data, even if you just have to say, look, I just bought a data set of 20,000 companies on CO2, and literally 70% of that is just estimates. Absolutely not correct. It's like as if we all collectively ask, let's say, how tall are you? It just doesn't make sense. I'd rather ask you directly. And that's basically I think the change that we're going to see in the data spectrum in order to come to better decisions.
Yeah, and the old garbage in, garbage out. Jan Erik, just returning to you, I saw a really interesting press release that you sent out with Graham Stock at Blue Bay Asset Management that, frankly, stuck their boot into Brazil and its inability to tackle deforestation there. I was interested in maybe following up a little bit about that, whether it shows, maybe I'm being a cynical journalist here, but does that show the limits to what investors can really do? In that you can send a release saying, we think this country should do more, but if the domestic politics don't allow for it, then people can say whatever they want, but there is very little stick behind it.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. We have engaged heavily with Brazil on the topic on deforestation, and actually I think it's an example of how engagement today is also about engaging with governments. And of course, you're right, it's the interaction between us as investors, the companies on the ground, and the governments that can really create change, and we need to work together. In this context, I think we were able to gather 55 asset owners and managers running about $7 trillion. And of course, as the NGOs highlight, this discussion and also the discussion we now see today in Brazil would not be possible without speaking a language that the local government understand. And of course, the need for capital, the need for funding for the Brazilian economy is a key concern, and that's why we have an impact. So,
but is it having an impact? I mean, would, for example, Storebrand or any of the other signatories to this actually say, look, we're not going to invest in Brazilian government bonds anymore. We're not going to invest in Bovespa-listed companies anymore. I mean, that would have bite, but are people ready to go that far yet? Or are we moving towards maybe that being a real threat?
I think as we made it clear for the government, we want to stay invested in the Brazilian economy. Of course, if they're not able to turn the development on deforestation in a different direction, the risk of staying invested would eventually be so high that we would have to draw back. So far, we've been met with a government that are willing to listen. They're continuously willing to have a dialogue on what measures needs to be taken. We had a call with Vice President Mourão last week. And of course, neither them or we are content with the development we saw in 2020. But I think the way forward is to continue this dialogue and put pressure on the government to make them put action on the ground that really counts.
Yeah. Well, thanks. Well, I guess 2020 was a bit of an omni-shambles year for pretty much everything. CD, just returning to you, I mean, you talked about Nysnø and what maybe the UK could learn from that. I mean, as I mentioned, I grew up in both countries, so I'm always keen to hear more about what we can learn. I mean, what can the UK learn from Nysnø? I mean, quick, we only have, I think, less than a minute left, really.
Yeah, thank you. Well, so Nysnø was quite a new invention from the Norwegian government because we was established 2 years ago, and our task is to mobilize private capital into the field of climate finance or climate technology. And I think, to at least to my knowledge, and I would really have feedback if I'm wrong, but I think it's a unique setup so that we have a very specific mandate. And every capital issue when we invest, we need always to have at least 30% private fresh money into this new company or new investment. So, and we see that our mandate work, we have really been able to mobilize private capital now and have made very interesting investment also together with UK co-investors like AP Venture, which is based in London, one of the leading hydrogen fund in the world, actually. We have co-invested in a Norwegian company called Seg Power, which work with blue hydrogen. So, and we see that we are able also to be like be a lead investor when that is needed, and then allocate more private capital into interesting fields. But we are very much aligned with the private players, so there is no subsidiaries in Nysnø. We are a capitalist like the other private players, and at least our experience is that this work very well together.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, Omar, Siri, Jan Erik, thank you so much for being here today. We have to shuffle on quickly. Again, I think we probably could have talked for a lot longer. So I'm just moving over to the last panel here, and let me just dig out my notes. As you can see, I take a lot of them, being a journalist. So we have Amalie Amin, the Director of Climate Change at the CDC Group, Marius Holm, the Chief Executive of Zero, and Sir Roger Gifford, the President of the UK Green Finance Institute. Hi guys, thank you so much for being here today. I hope, thank you for waiting patiently for us. Sir Roger, maybe we start with you. As has been discussed earlier today, standards still seem to be a little bit all over the place. I'd love to hear how important you think it is to develop some sort of a common taxonomy for sustainability issues.
Well, thank you, Robin, and very nice to join you, and nice to see a lot of friendly faces on the screen. Can't wait to get together in person. I think we have to see this as an evolving issue, Robin. It's only a few years ago we didn't even use the word taxonomy when we were talking about green finance. So we've come a long way in a short space of time. We estimate there are now some 40 taxonomies around the world which are being used by different countries in different ways, and everyone agrees, yes, we should have common standards. Never forget that in a green bond, you know exactly what you're buying. So an investor doesn't like something, he doesn't like the technology, they don't buy it. And that's the great advantage of green finance. But I do think we are heading for agreed international standards, particularly in international currencies, with some local country variations in things like shipping and nuclear, biofuels, which some investors like, some don't. And as long as the investor knows what he's buying, that's okay. And I think in the context of this new UK-Norway collaboration, there's some really good areas around transition to discuss. I'm a banker as well, as you may know. And you at the FT have used this phrase, the olive bonds, and I think that's a great phrase. We've tried light green before, but I think olive is better. And I think, for instance, in the area of shipping, we saw a really interesting sustainability-linked bond by the shipping company Odfjell, a Norwegian company, just last week. A really good example of the way forwards, where the return to investors is based on Odfjell's progress in its sustainability planning. And that's the kind of imaginative financing that I think will give rise to encouraging companies to develop their own sustainability plans. By linking their carbon dioxide emissions with their bond financing terms, they've bolstered their commitments and they'll inspire others to follow for sure. Also interesting how the share price of Odfjell skyrocketed after the sustainability-linked bond was announced. So it seemed to be win-win for everyone all the way around.
Everybody loves ESG.
EU is also doing
days.
very good work here, Robin.
Well, everybody loves ESG, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. EU's doing excellent work in this space, particularly on the international global standards, and I think we all are participating together in that. Leave it there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm also interested in these sort of step up and these concrete nudgy bonds almost. It is really fascinating. How much, I mean, so far it seems to be very idiosyncratic and they've all been really interesting. How much do you think this is, a start of a wave, or whether it's going to be still case by case? These sort of concrete, I cut emissions by 50% and I get rewarded with a lower interest rate, for example.
Yeah. And what's wrong with that?
Yeah,
I mean,
it's a great idea, yeah. But are we going to see more of that, or is it going to be case by case?
I think we'll see more of that. Will it become absolutely standard? That depends on the company. It may well be that in the shipping sector, or in the oil and gas sector, we see much more of a common practice arising around linking demonstrable returns to investors to demonstrable sustainability targets. That is absolutely possible. Whether it will go across industry to some of the harder industries like cement and steel, I wouldn't want to predict on that, because we're still somewhere away on the technology curve still from finding solutions in some of these industries.
Yeah, that's true. Well, Molly, turning to you, I'd love to hear your thoughts on how we can improve access to finance for businesses that provide adaptation services, resiliency technologies, and things like that. I mean, that still seems to be a bit of a bottleneck, right?
Thank you. Yes, exactly. So adaptation and resilience is, one of the sort of urgent challenges that we face now, particularly in the markets that CDC invested in, Norfund, in Africa, South Asia, where they're already feeling very severe impacts, already feeling those much faster than I think we all anticipated maybe 10, 20 years ago. And we know that governments can't deliver on that agenda on their own. So it's really important to work with the private sector to build out the private sector businesses, which will likely to be SMEs mainly, because adaptation needs are very context specific. What is required to help a community or a particular sector adapt will depend on what is the particular physical climate risk being faced in that particular area, and then what is the economic activity that you're trying to really make resilient. So very context specific, which really requires working with and building out the ecosystem, if you like, to bring forward SMEs that can bring those technologies and services. But, again, at the same time, the business case is not so clear. And, so again, it's really very challenging from, private sector perspective where, there are very limited business opportunities. I mean, we've undertaken some market mapping and we are identifying some, innovative entrepreneurs and small businesses that are coming forward with ideas, but, they're really early stage. So much more sort of venture capital type investment. So particularly challenging, but it is an area that we're working to address. And we launched a new collaborative back in November where we want to work with other DFIs, but also development banks, national development banks, multilateral development banks, who can really help build out the pipeline and importantly support governments to enable them to better overcome some of the market barriers and really start to, build the markets, local domestic markets for these types of businesses.
Yeah, it does seem to be sort of an area tailor-made for the DFIs. I mean, how can, for example, Norfund and the CDC work more closely together? I mean, what do you think you've learned that, they can maybe learn from you guys and vice versa for that matter?
Yeah, so, I mean, in the context of this collaborative, I mean, I think one of the key things we're all recognizing is that we're all learning as we do when it comes to this agenda. There is no good practice to follow. We don't even have very clear set of metrics to know when we are succeeding. I mean, when you're thinking about low carbon, I mean, greenhouse gas reductions, it's a common metric. It's relatively easy and comparable. Again, because adaptation is such a context-specific issue, it's hard to know if what you're investing in or is actually really doing the job, or potentially creating what some refer to as maladaptation, where you're having some potentially negative implications in 5 or 10 years' time. So it's a very challenging area, and I think we need to learn together. And I mean, we have last November, the European DFIs made a commitment, Norfund ourselves, to share lessons and collaborate more around this agenda, recognising that we all need to learn from each other. None of us have the answer. But, as we do so, then we can come together and hopefully, harmonise, come together around a common methodologies, common standards, as Sir Roger emphasised, which is so important to be able to crowd in private investors, which of course is, really what we're aiming towards over time.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Marius, turning to you, I mean, you've also been working on some of these issues, for a long time, like most of the other people here that we've been talking to. I'd love to hear what you think might be the most fruitful areas for UK and Norwegian cooperation.
Well, I think the problem that we would like to solve in terms of getting green investments into the growing economies in Asia is, the 5 or 6 largest growing economies in Asia and Africa will alone be able to exceed the global carbon budget for the 1.5-degree target if they copy China's coal-based way to growth. So we need to fill the green investment gap, and the most important thing being investing in clean power production to cover the growing needs for electricity in those regions. And if we look at what CDC and Norfund have been doing, they have been quite successful. They have both invested equity capital with great returns. It is regarded very complicated to invest in energy in developing countries, but both CDC and Norfund is actually doing quite well. And so what we're looking for are ways for for DFIs to create an investment ecosystem where private capital can join them in and building renewable energy in those growing economies. The Norwegian government has stated that they will launch some sort of new fund, and hopefully that will be launched in the COP in Glasgow this fall, hopefully. And we are playing a lot of sort of ideas into the government now, to make this operative as soon as possible. And I think The most practical idea would be to create a new fund operated by Norfund. So we don't need to create anything new, just provide more capital. But this time, the primary objective of the capital would be to combat climate change and in combination with development. And what we see is what we imagine is kind of some sort of Norfund climate fund who invests not invest directly in renewable infrastructure, but partners with a privately owned investment fund, where, for instance, Jan Erik from the previous session from Storebrand Asset Management could be one of the investors, and other institutional investors like him. So I think for institutional investors, renewable energy in a growing economy is a great opportunity, because they, with the current low interest rates, it's difficult to get the return that those funds need. So it's a great opportunity if DFIs can sort of pave the way and create opportunities for those private investors.
Yeah, I mean, this is something I've covered. I used to cover the developing world a little bit more intensely, and clearly the opportunities are there. I mean, like, as you say, interest rates are low, and many big investors are desperate for high returning projects, especially ones that, you know, are worthy ones. But my impression has always been that especially public-private partnerships in the developing world are, in practice, fraught with all sorts of governance issues. I mean, how can Norfund or the CDC or other sort of DFIs help bridge that? Or is it just an element that we just need to learn that these countries aren't maybe quite as, you know, transparent as we're used to here in Scandinavia?
Well, I think you're right that there's a perception that this is very difficult. But if you look at what is happening, it is really not that impossible. For instance, the Norwegian pension fund KLP has been investing successfully together with Norfund in renewable energy projects in Kenya and other African countries. So this can be done, but I think we need some political clout as well. We cannot expect that developing countries introduce a perfect price on carbon or other externalities on the short term, but we can expect that if we provide capital and capacity to develop a clean energy sector, those countries need to provide some market design certainty and to be willing to reduce the political risk surrounding those investments. But I think probably that is one of the areas where we can gain from doing this together across the North Sea, because doing this together, not by combining the funds themselves, but, you know, maybe investing in the same projects and working alongside politically, the two countries will together have more clout to influence the investments, you know, surroundings in the countries where we want to invest.
Yeah. I mean, so Roger, what do you think about this idea? Sort of a new climate impact PPP renewable energy project under Norfund, but something that, you know, is more dedicated to this area. Do you think that's a goer that would work?
Yeah, I think I'm all for it. I think you, like every project, you've got to look closely at the debt equity balance. Who's taking the risk and what is the nature of the risk? And personally, I really think there's an opportunity here to re-mandate our multinational development banks into taking a wider risk profile than they have been permitted in the past. So often I hear projects are floundering because of politics. It's not. It's because the basic lenders don't like the credit risk there. There's not sufficient upfront either currency or political cover for the first loss. And I think there's an opportunity here to talk to multinational development banks and see what they need to support them in having a wider risk mandate than they do. I think the issue of Africa is absolutely well identified. I know the Chinese are extremely interested in developing energy in Africa, also in wind and solar, as well as coal, which is the easy option at the moment. So we need to be hot on this. And I think Marius is absolutely to the point when he pinpoints this as something that, you know, if we solve this, gosh, we've solved a lot. We really have. And the problem with energy in Africa, we haven't done it yet.
Yeah. Amal Lee, I mean, I assume you're doing an immense amount of work leading up to COP. What do you think? What would you like to see? I mean, do you think that this idea for a Norfund climate fund would work? I mean, is the CDC thinking along the same lines?
Yeah, absolutely. We need lots of these funds. Without a doubt, we need to strengthen the public-private. DFIs have a critical role in that respect. I think also, though, we need to recognise the importance of building out the pipeline, particularly in Africa, where finance may not be the biggest challenge. Actually, it may be a lack of good bankable projects, and that's an area we absolutely have to focus on. And or we need partners. We need to partner with others who focus on that, because as a DFI we don't do pipeline development, but we need others to partner with others in that respect, and that's also very, very important alongside bringing the finance, bringing the capital.
Yeah, I mean, on the DFI point, Amalie, I mean, one thing that, Sir Roger pointed out, and I've heard this many times, that, if the development institutes took more of the upfront equity risk, that would enable more institutional money to flow in there. And I get the impression that DFIs, or some people, some of them, tacitly agree, but they need to know that politically there'll be some big project that goes belly up, or there'll be corruption involved, it'll be splashed over the tabloids in the local country. So in practice, they just find it very hard to do. But is there a way of getting people comfortable with the fact that to have real impact, we have to take real risk, and risk sometimes does come, like that risk sometimes is realized?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what we do as DFIs, actually. We do take on that risk, and we do provide equity in particular to bring others in. And, I think, as I said, we don't get directly involved in engaging with governments to manage policy risk or political risk, which is, obviously slightly different. I mean, I think the policy risk issue is very important as we think about transformation and, putting in place incentives for renewables, for, electromobility, how governments can also, build out the networks again for, to bring in more renewables into the system, or build out electromobility over time, the charging networks. These are often government activities that, governments do need support to be able to, move at a pace that others, as we see here in Europe, are doing. I mean, Norway in particular, I think, is really leading the way on electromobility, and I think how we can help take these models and these opportunities to Africa. That's exactly the role of DFIs and what we're trying to do.
Yeah. Well, I think we'll cut it off there to actually leave a little bit of talk for the next speaker. But I'd like to say thank you for everybody here. I hope you've enjoyed it, half as much as I have as a British Norwegian citizen, a joint citizen. It's nice to see the UK and Norway working so closely together, and that we've managed to have an entire conversation where I think Brexit only was mentioned once in passing early on. That must be some sort of record. But next up, I want to introduce Kim Gabrielli, the CEO of Global Compact here in Norway, and I'll pass the time over to him. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you very much for that, Robin, and good afternoon, everyone out there. I'm going to say a couple of things about the action platform together with EY and Thornham. 6 years ago, Mark Carney, as you know, back then the governor of the Bank of England, said, climate change will be threatening the long-term prosperity. And while there is still time to act, the window of opportunity is finite and shrinking. And there is little doubt. The window of opportunity still shrinks today, and our responsibility to act is even greater. But when Carney closes a door, he opens a window. Today, Carney calls climate change the greatest commercial opportunity of our time. In his new role as the Prime Minister's finance advisor for the COP26, Carney seizes opportunities where others see despair. In the UK-Norway Sustainable Finance Action Platform, our action platform, we want to follow in Carney's footsteps and of course seize this window of opportunity. We ask all of you out there to join us. We ask you to join us on 3 things: to leverage the momentum of the COP26 to drive real progress on sustainable finance and business, to embark on a 10-month journey and process together with us towards the COP26 and 50 to 60 other British and Norwegian companies, finance actors, and public actors. And not least, we want you, as the third point, we want to enable you and the other participants to develop game-changing solutions and partnerships. Partnerships and solutions that really create change in both policy, finance, and business. The COP26 campaign, developed by Kani and colleagues, you can see it up on the screen just now, will guide us in the work with these 5 action tracks, and is clearly defined deliverables. The 5 tracks, as you can see, are financing global commitments, reporting, risk management, returns, and mobilization. We will use these 5 action tracks to give a guide both to Norwegian and British home markets, and of course the global markets as such. But you may wonder where to start. UK and Norway have many shared interests. Looking at energy and maritime industries, the ocean unites us more than it divides us. Also in the global cooperation, the blue connects us more than it splits us. While the UK and Norway are amongst the top 10 donors to the UN, we are both amongst the Euro family's blue sheep. But there are 3 industries that stand out: shipping, energy, and seafood. If you look at shipping, the Norwegian merchant fleet and the British merchant fleet together will constitute the largest fleet in the world. Norway ranking at the 4th place, the UK at the 6th. Energy. Almost half of the British gas imports originates and comes from Norway. But Equinor's Howe in Scotland is the world's first floating wind farm, as we heard earlier today, and it's powering around 20,000 British homes. But of course, most importantly, for over 70 years, Norwegian cod has been crucial, supplying the need of British fish and chips industry. I use the word game-changing solutions, but what do we really mean by that, and how do we get there? For us, game-changing solutions and partnerships are data research solutions, there are finance services and products, and of course there are public-private partnerships. EY will facilitate the process on the action platform and make sure that we get through the timeline and the process. Hanne Thornham will take you through that in a minute. But just by ending, let me give you some examples of what public, private, and finance actors can achieve when they embark on a well-facilitated process. First of all, UN Global Compact Ocean Platform has brought together financial actors and companies for a long time and have developed a framework for blue bonds. We also heard about the sustainability-linked fund from Odfjell earlier today as another example. But of course also the UK Green Finance Initiative has led to the UK Green Finance Institute, the Investment Bank, and now also the Green Sovereign Bond. Could we perhaps get inspired to launch a common UK-Norway Blue Finance Institute or a fund, or perhaps even some common initiative in development policy? Could CDC and Norfund go together? Or the last thing we of course have to talk about, since we haven't talked about Brexit, we need to talk about the taxonomy. There are still areas of the EU taxonomy that has not been defined, and it will be this year. So many of them are related to the blue maritime sector and industries, and shipping and seafood are both, or parts of these sectors are also not yet defined in the taxonomy. So all of these examples shows us that we can do bilateral things together. We are excited, and we do believe that our 2 countries can both learn from each other and make sure that we bring our common interests forward. So to end where I started, the UK-Norway Sustainable Finance Action Platform, quite a long name, is here for all of you and all of us to leverage on the momentum of the COP26. COP26 could mark a real change to identify game-changing solutions. Solutions that will help each and every one of us and every one of you to find our inner Marconi. To seize that the climate change as the largest commercial opportunity of our time. But in order to do that, we need you on board, and we need you together with us to take action on climate change. I will now hand the word to Hanne Thornham from EY to go through the process, and then we will give you, at the end of the session, we'll give you some more contact information on how you can join in the action platform. So Hanne, over to you.
Hello everyone, thank you Kim. So after this very inspiring row of speakers, I will now give you some practical points about how we will facilitate this exciting platform. So my name is Hanne Thornham, and I'm a partner in EY, and I lead our climate change and sustainability services here in Norway. And I could also mention that I did most of my education and the first years of my working life in the wonderful United Kingdom. So as EY, we are very honored to have this role of facilitating this platform. And we will be doing this from my team here in Norway together with my wonderful colleagues in the UK. And we are, of course, very excited to have that role. So if you can move to the next slide, please. If that works. Yes. So first, some principles as to how we will aim to facilitate this platform. One focus for us is to bring together different perspectives and ideas from the participants, and bringing together these perspectives from 2 different countries will be very exciting. And we will do that to try to bring innovation for what we have mentioned today many times, game-changing solutions and partnerships towards the COP26. We will also aim to focus on our shared interests, and I think that's been made clear many times today that there are many interesting topics for us to work together on. And of course, we will also aim for real impact in everything that we do with this platform. As facilitators, we will also aim to create an atmosphere where we can be both creative and innovative, but also make sure that we're to the point so we get real results. Next slide, please. So this is the roadmap that we've drawn up towards the COP26. And as you see, we have 3 workshops per finance action track. And participants can choose to be part of one stream or more if they want. We will also have a live platform for collaboration between the workshops. And at the end, we will summarize this with actions and suggestions towards the COP26. So we're starting off today with this kickoff, and we're signing up participants until March. And in March, we start the ideation phase, and we'll have 2 workshops for each action track in this phase. And this is where we'll be brainstorming ideas and working out which areas to focus on together. We then have a commitment phase in May, June, where we will really aim to pin down the key solutions and partnerships that we want to accelerate action on and ensure that we have the necessary commitment. We then go into a communication phase where we will all together work out how to communicate these solutions and partnerships, and then make sure that we get the attention for the COP26. Next slide, please. And we also have some expectations for our participants. So we hope and expect that each participant bring their own unique point of view, and that they have a point of view on where they want to accelerate action. We also expect for participants to be solution-minded so that we can quickly get to actions. And we also want our participants to engage, share, learn from each other, and make sure to contribute throughout the process. And we also hope that you will share our excitement for this platform. So final slide. We ask you to please join us in making an impact, and we really hope to see you there.
And I'm just going to say thank you to all the speakers, to Robin, of course, and all of you that have been with us the last 1.5 hours. Just some practical information now at the end. If you want to join in, or you have questions to this last section on the practicalities, you will find a questionnaire in the chat. There you also find the information, contact information to my colleagues Amy in the UN Global Compact UK and Abhimanyu here in the Norwegian UN Global Compact. So please reach out to us. We are happy to have a call with you about the action platforms and how to join in and register for it. There is also an action platform homepage where you can find more information about pricing and about participation. We are setting up sets of workshops now the next 5 months, like Hanne said. So there will be a lot of opportunities to work on different topics and to find solutions going ahead. So thank you so much for joining today. That was the last word from us at the UK-Norway Sustainable Finance Action Platform. And goodbye.